The story of King Solomon is often told in fragments: wisdom, wealth, and the legendary temple, but the deeper truth, the hidden power that made him extraordinary, is a story almost entirely untold. Most narratives stop at his judicious decisions, his grand constructions, and his influence over nations. Yet these accounts only scratch the surface. They paint him as a man of wisdom, but not as a man who wielded a unique, almost mystical authority that transcended his human limitations. To understand Solomon's secret, we must first step back and examine the world he inherited, the lineage he represented, and the spiritual framework that empowered him. Solomon was born into a complex legacy. As the son of David, the king who united the tribes of Israel and whose heart was described as after God's own, Solomon inherited more than a kingdom. He inherited a covenant, a divine responsibility intertwined with the history of his people. David's life was marked by triumph and failure, by acts of courage and moments of moral failure, yet God's promise to him was clear: his lineage would endure, and his son would reign with wisdom. The mantle of leadership was not merely political, it was spiritual. Solomon's power, then, cannot be understood purely in worldly terms. It was the intersection of divine favor, spiritual insight, and strategic acumen that set him apart from kings who relied solely on armies and alliances. From the moment he ascended to the throne, Solomon demonstrated a capacity for discernment that was exceptional. His first recorded act as king, the request for wisdom over wealth or longevity, revealed the essence of his secret. Unlike rulers who clamored for material accumulation or political dominance, Solomon recognized that true power required understanding, not just authority. God's response was extraordinary. Wisdom was granted, but wealth, honor, and unmatched influence came as a natural byproduct. This combination of divine insight and practical authority created a power structure that no human king had ever wielded before. It is this integration, spiritual, intellectual, and political, that constitutes the first layer of Solomon's hidden power. Yet, wisdom alone does not explain the full measure of Solomon's influence. There was something deeper, something that the biblical text hints at but never fully unveils: a mastery over forces both natural and supernatural. Stories of Solomon commanding the wind, controlling spirits, and understanding the language of animals are often relegated to legend. Yet the consistency of these accounts across historical and mystical texts suggests that they were more than myth. In this sense, Solomon's power was not merely administrative or intellectual. It was a calibrated dominion over creation itself. He governed not just people but the invisible threads of existence, tapping into a cosmic order few have ever approached. Contrast is key to understanding Solomon's greatness. While other kings relied on fear or brute force, Solomon's approach was subtle yet absolute. His enemies were subdued not only through military might but through psychological and spiritual mastery. Nations came to him in awe, bringing tribute not because they feared immediate violence but because they recognized a superior intelligence at work, one that aligned human ambition with divine purpose. This is the essence of his secret: the ability to harmonize mortal concerns with celestial laws, turning potential conflict into strategic advantage. The Bible records envoys from Sheba and other kingdoms, drawn not only by curiosity but by the magnetic authority Solomon projected. His reputation as a wise judge and effective ruler became a self-reinforcing cycle, attracting respect, wealth, and loyalty from across the known world. Part of what remains untold is how Solomon cultivated this power. It was not merely inherited or granted. It was disciplined, honed through ritual, study, and observance. Ancient texts suggest that Solomon studied not only the Torah but also the natural order, astronomy, geometry, botany, and the hidden patterns that govern life itself. He combined empirical observation with spiritual insight, creating a governance model that was predictive, almost algorithmic in its precision. Unlike rulers who relied on intuition alone, Solomon's decisions were calculated yet inspired, evidence of a mind trained to perceive connections invisible to ordinary leaders. He bridged the seen and unseen worlds, which allowed him to implement policies and make judgments that appeared almost prophetic. One of the most intriguing aspects of Solomon's power was his ability to command the supernatural. The Talmud and other Jewish mystical writings reference Solomon's use of the Shem HaMephorash, the secret name of God, as a source of authority over spirits and angels. While modern readers may view this as esoteric legend, in the context of ancient Israelite belief, It was a practical manifestation of divine authorization. Solomon's temple, beyond its architectural grandeur, was a focal point for spiritual alignment, a physical and metaphysical center where heaven and earth intersected. Those who entered it understood that authority was not just wielded through armies but through sacred channels, and Solomon was the conduit. This mastery over spiritual and earthly domains gave Solomon unprecedented influence. He was a king whose power could extend beyond conventional boundaries. While contemporary rulers measured success in territorial expansion or economic wealth, Solomon's reign demonstrated that true power could be silent, invisible, and yet fully effective. He could maintain peace, direct trade, and enforce justice with a minimal reliance on coercion. Nations voluntarily submitted to his governance because they sensed a higher order at play, a reflection of divine wisdom in human form. This is why Solomon's story continues to captivate scholars, theologians, and strategists alike. His genius was multidimensional, blending intellect, diplomacy, and spiritual authority into an integrated force that reshaped his world. The implications of Solomon's secret extend beyond history and legend. By understanding the mechanisms of his influence, one sees patterns that resonate through centuries of leadership studies. The principles Solomon employed, wisdom as a foundation for power, integration of spiritual and practical knowledge, mastery of perception, and strategic use of influence, are mirrored in modern leadership theory, albeit without the mystical elements. What sets him apart is the way he combined ethical judgment with strategic foresight, creating a model of rulership that is at once effective and morally anchored. This duality, strength tempered by discernment, is rare in any era and remains one of the most compelling aspects of his untold story. Solomon's secrets, therefore, are not just about ancient marvels or mystical feats. They are about a philosophy of power that integrates wisdom, morality, and strategy. He demonstrates that influence is not merely about control, wealth, or fear, but about understanding the deeper currents of human and divine order. The lessons hidden in his life are subtle yet profound. Knowledge must be paired with insight, authority with responsibility, and ambition with humility. These are not abstract concepts but practical principles that governed one of the most influential reigns in human history. By the time Solomon reached the height of his reign, he had created an empire that was both materially prosperous and spiritually aligned. Cities thrived, trade flourished, and the temple stood as a testament to divine human cooperation. His reputation for wisdom and justice reached far beyond Israel, touching the ears and hearts of kings, merchants, and scholars alike. This global recognition was not accidental, it was the natural outcome of a carefully cultivated balance between spiritual insight and worldly strategy. Solomon's secret power lay in his ability to synchronize these dimensions, making him an exceptional figure not merely in history but in the ongoing conversation about leadership, influence, and divine favor. Solomon's secret power was not static. It evolved as he matured, revealing layers that many have overlooked. While history often highlights his early acts of wisdom, the judgment between two women claiming the same child, or his clever administration of justice, these were merely visible expressions of a far more profound authority. Beneath the surface, Solomon operated with an awareness of cosmic order, a perception of human nature, and a strategic understanding of nations that allowed him to anticipate, influence, and shape outcomes before others even realized what was at stake. This anticipatory wisdom was not simply intellectual brilliance. It was the ability to read patterns in people, kingdoms, and even the natural world, aligning them with divine purposes. Contrast offers insight into the depth of his skill. Kings of the ancient world often relied on intimidation, war, or ostentation to secure loyalty. They built fortresses, amassed armies, and displayed their wealth as a means of asserting dominance. Solomon, by comparison, employed subtlety. His influence extended through networks of trade, diplomacy, and religious authority. Envoys and merchants came to his court, not because of fear, but because of admiration and the recognition of his wisdom. He cultivated alliances that were durable, founded not on coercion but on mutual benefit and a perception that his guidance brought prosperity. This nuanced approach is a hallmark of his secret power. He reshaped human behavior through foresight, reputation, and strategic generosity, rather than through overt force. One of the most remarkable manifestations of his power was in the construction of the Temple of Solomon, often called the First Temple. While most accounts emphasize its grandeur, the gold, the cedarwood, and the intricate carvings, what is rarely discussed is the spiritual significance embedded in every detail. The temple was designed not only as a place of worship but as a physical representation of cosmic order, a conduit for divine presence, and a center for moral and spiritual governance. Each measurement, each placement of objects, and each ceremonial procedure was deliberate, a system designed to align human activity with divine principles. The temple was, in essence, an extension of Solomon's authority, a sacred instrument that amplified his influence and anchored the spiritual life of the nation. Beyond the temple, Solomon's mastery extended to the natural and supernatural worlds. The biblical texts and apocryphal traditions speak of his control over spirits and demons, often referred to as shamir, or beings that could accomplish tasks beyond human capacity. Through these powers, he was able to perform feats of construction, command elements of nature, and maintain order within his realm with unprecedented efficiency. While modern interpretations may treat these accounts as allegorical, in the context of ancient Near Eastern culture, they represented legitimate aspects of kingship authority that combined political, spiritual, and supernatural dimensions. By integrating these domains, Solomon exercised a power that transcended ordinary human capabilities, a secret that gave him unrivaled effectiveness and influence. Solomon's wealth was another facet of his secret. While riches alone do not constitute power, in his case, wealth became a tool of strategy. Gold, silver, and precious materials were not hoarded. Selfishly, they were leveraged to secure alliances, fund infrastructure, and create a stable economy that strengthened his kingdom. Trade networks extended far beyond Israel, reaching as far as the Arabian Peninsula, Africa, and India. Ships carried exotic goods, craftsmen, and scholars, transforming Israel into a hub of commerce, culture, and innovation. This economic influence reinforced Solomon's spiritual and political authority, creating a feedback loop. Wealth facilitated projects that demonstrated wisdom and power, which in turn attracted further respect, tribute, and loyalty. His mastery of resources exemplifies a principle often overlooked. True power integrates material, social, and spiritual capital. The story of the Queen of Sheba illustrates Solomon's ability to combine wisdom, diplomacy, and psychological insight. When she arrived, testing his knowledge and seeking to understand the magnitude of his fame, Solomon met her with an intricate balance of honesty, strategic presentation, and demonstration of insight. By answering her questions and revealing profound truths, he established a relationship based not on intimidation but on recognition of his intellect and discernment. This encounter demonstrates a recurring theme in his reign: power that stems from perception and understanding rather than coercion alone. Solomon understood that influence was amplified when others recognized the alignment between his wisdom and divine authority. Another dimension of his secret power was his system of governance. Solomon implemented administrative divisions, appointed officials, and created a structure that allowed the kingdom to function efficiently and predictably. Yet, these systems were not purely bureaucratic. They were designed to reflect ethical principles and divine guidance. The allocation of responsibilities, the rotation of officials, and the collection of tribute were all arranged to balance authority and accountability, creating stability while reinforcing the perception of fairness and justice. This deliberate structure magnified his personal power, allowing him to manage a vast kingdom with remarkable effectiveness, ensuring that his influence persisted across generations and that the state itself operated as a reflection of his wisdom. Contrast between Solomon's methods and those of other rulers highlights the sophistication of his approach. While neighboring kings often ruled through fear or military dominance, Solomon's strategy was anticipatory, relational, and integrative. He recognized the power of narrative, reputation, and perception, understanding that psychological and social influence could achieve what armies alone could not. By fostering loyalty, admiration, and even awe, he secured compliance without the constant expenditure of force, demonstrating a principle still relevant to leadership today. Enduring authority comes from alignment of respect, perception, and competence, not from coercion alone. Solomon's secret power also extended to knowledge and communication. He composed texts that reflected deep understanding of human nature, morality, and the universe. The Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon, while often interpreted primarily as literary or religious works, served another function. They communicated principles of wisdom, ethics, and governance that reinforced his authority. By codifying insight, he ensured that his influence extended beyond his lifetime, shaping not only immediate policy but the moral and intellectual development of his society. The written word became a tool of enduring power, embedding guidance and philosophy that transcended generations. At the heart of Solomon's secret is a pattern of integration. Unlike rulers who focus narrowly on wealth, armies, or religious devotion, Solomon combined these elements into a cohesive system. Wisdom-guided action, wealth-enabled strategy, spiritual authority commanded loyalty, and communication reinforced perception. This holistic approach created an unparalleled form of leadership. To the outside world, Solomon appeared invincible, wise, and just. To his subjects, he embodied the alignment of divine will and human capability. And to history, he left a legacy that continues to provoke fascination, study, and debate. While Solomon's administrative, spiritual, and diplomatic powers are well documented, the most enigmatic aspect of his authority lies in the subtle, almost mystical, dimensions of his reign. Ancient sources hint at abilities that went beyond human understanding, qualities that inspired awe and even fear among neighboring nations. These were powers not merely of intellect or strategy, but of perception and influence, an almost supernatural acuity in understanding the hearts, minds, and intentions of others. Accounts describe how he could discern truth from falsehood instantly, judge disputes with unerring fairness, and predict the outcomes of human behavior with astonishing accuracy. Such gifts were not purely for personal glorification. They functioned as instruments of governance, ensuring justice, stability, and prosperity. Contrast is again key to appreciating the uniqueness of Solomon. Leaders of his time often relied on brute force or intimidation to maintain control. Armies were raised, fortifications built, and rival kingdoms subdued through violence or coercion. Solomon, however, achieved the same objectives through insight, negotiation, and the cultivation of loyalty. His judgments were so precise that they became legendary, drawing visitors and challengers from distant lands eager to witness his wisdom. The psychological and strategic elements of his leadership reveal a form of power that is subtle yet profound, influence through perception, alignment, and understanding, rather than sheer might. Solomon's control over the natural and supernatural worlds also added to the mystique surrounding him. Ancient texts speak of his command over spirits, angels, and even animals, suggesting a deep connection to forces beyond the ordinary human realm. Whether these accounts are interpreted literally or metaphorically, they indicate that Solomon's authority extended into domains that were both practical and symbolic. By commanding spirits or harnessing extraordinary phenomena, he could accomplish tasks impossible for others, such as constructing monumental buildings, gathering resources, or maintaining order. These stories emphasize that his power was integrative, encompassing the spiritual, physical, and social dimensions of life in a way that few rulers could ever replicate. The story of Solomon's interaction with the Queen of Sheba illustrates the practical application of his secret power. When she arrived in Jerusalem to test his wisdom, Solomon approached the encounter with both strategic acumen and personal insight. He responded to her questions with precision, but also anticipated her expectations, framing his answers to demonstrate not only intelligence but also empathy and understanding. Through this, he established a relationship that transcended simple diplomacy. He created an impression of omniscience, of a ruler whose wisdom was comprehensive and whose authority was both acknowledged and respected. This incident highlights a recurring theme. Solomon's power often manifested through perception, influence, and the ability to shape outcomes subtly, rather than through overt displays of force. Solomon's wealth, while immense, was inseparable from his strategic vision. Gold, silver, and exotic materials were not mere symbols of luxury, they were tools to advance his political and social objectives. Trade networks extended across the Middle East, Africa, and India, bringing rare goods, skilled artisans, and knowledge into his kingdom. This economic influence allowed him to finance monumental projects, secure loyalty through gifts and tribute, and establish Israel as a hub of culture, commerce, and learning. In effect, Solomon's wealth became an instrument of his secret power, enabling him to project influence far beyond his borders while reinforcing the perception of wisdom and capability. Central to understanding Solomon's authority is his relationship with the divine. Unlike secular rulers who claim power through conquest or inheritance, Solomon's legitimacy derived from a covenantal connection to God. This divine endorsement was not merely symbolic. It infused his decisions, policies, and judgments with a moral and spiritual dimension that commanded respect. The recognition that his authority aligned with divine will amplified his influence, making resistance or rebellion not only politically unwise but spiritually precarious. This interplay of spiritual and temporal authority is a hallmark of his secret power. It allowed him to operate with a level of legitimacy and moral weight that few other rulers could claim. The Temple of Solomon exemplifies the integration of these dimensions. Beyond its architectural splendor, the temple functioned as a center of governance, spiritual practice, and cultural identity. Each element, measurements, materials, and rituals was carefully designed to reflect divine order and human responsibility. The temple was not just a place of worship, it was a tool of social cohesion, a tangible representation of Solomon's wisdom, and a mechanism through which spiritual and political authority were intertwined. Through the temple, Solomon extended his influence across both sacred and secular spheres, creating a lasting legacy that continues to capture the imagination of scholars and believers alike. Solomon's written works further illustrate the breadth of his secret power. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon are more than literary achievements. They are vehicles for transmitting principles of governance, ethics, and human psychology. By codifying his insights, Solomon ensured that his influence extended beyond his lifetime, shaping the intellectual and moral development of his society for generations. This strategic use of knowledge demonstrates an often overlooked aspect of power, the ability to institutionalize wisdom so that it outlasts the immediate reach of a ruler's authority. Another facet of his authority was the strategic use of alliances. Solomon's diplomacy was nuanced, leveraging marriage, trade, and cultural exchange to secure stability and loyalty. Unlike rulers who relied solely on coercion, Solomon recognized that enduring power required alignment of interests, mutual respect, and the cultivation of networks that extended influence indirectly. By carefully managing relationships, he created a web of interconnected obligations and perceptions that enhanced his authority without necessitating constant intervention. This approach underscores a recurring principle in his secret power. Influence often arises not from direct control, but from the orchestration of relationships, perceptions, and incentives. Ultimately, Solomon's secret power can be seen as a multidimensional system. It integrated wisdom, spiritual authority, wealth, diplomacy, and strategic foresight into a cohesive framework that allowed him to govern effectively and leave an enduring legacy. While contemporary accounts often focus on his decisions, judgments, and architectural achievements, the underlying mechanism of his power was the sophisticated alignment of human behavior, divine principle, and material resources. This system ensured that Solomon's influence was comprehensive, sustainable, and transformative, distinguishing him from rulers who relied on force, fear, or simple charisma. Beyond the visible manifestations of Solomon's power, there lies a more subtle, almost hidden dimension of his authority, one that blends spiritual perception, mystical insight, and practical governance into a unified form of influence. Accounts from both biblical and extra-biblical sources suggest that Solomon possessed an extraordinary ability to understand not only human behavior but also the underlying patterns of creation itself. This insight allowed him to anticipate challenges, navigate complex political landscapes, and maintain stability across a diverse and rapidly growing kingdom. In modern terms, one might describe it as a combination of emotional intelligence, strategic foresight, and intuitive understanding, amplified by what his contemporaries interpreted as divine favor. Solomon's mystical knowledge often intersected with practical leadership. Tales of his interactions with spirits, angels, and even supernatural creatures are more than folklore. They illustrate the principle that his influence extended into realms beyond ordinary perception. These stories describe how Solomon could command forces invisible to others, harness knowledge inaccessible to ordinary leaders, and perform feats that seemed impossible. For example, The legendary accounts of controlling demons to complete the temple suggest that he possessed the ability to mobilize unseen resources in ways that enhanced his kingdom's productivity. Whether interpreted literally or symbolically, these narratives emphasize a ruler whose authority encompassed both the tangible and intangible, the human and the divine. A critical element of Solomon's secret power was his unparalleled mastery of judgment and decision-making. The famous story of the two mothers claiming a child illustrates the depth of his insight into human nature. By observing behavior, asking the right questions, and framing choices in a manner that revealed inner truth, Solomon resolved the conflict with precision and fairness. This approach demonstrates an underlying principle. Wisdom is as much about perception and discernment as it is about knowledge or intelligence. The ability to reveal truth, anticipate outcomes, and guide behavior without coercion is a hallmark of his authority. Through such methods, Solomon maintained social order and reinforced his reputation as a ruler whose judgment was beyond reproach. Another dimension of his influence lay in the careful cultivation of knowledge networks. Solomon surrounded himself with scholars, artisans, and experts from diverse cultures, creating a court that functioned as a hub of intellectual exchange. This network enabled him to integrate innovations, philosophies, and technical skills from across the known world, ensuring that his kingdom was not only materially wealthy but also culturally and intellectually advanced. By synthesizing knowledge from multiple sources, Solomon enhanced both the practical and symbolic dimensions of his reign. The temple itself, constructed with extraordinary precision and adorned with imported materials, reflects the culmination of these efforts, serving as a tangible expression of both wisdom and authority. Solomon's wealth, while often emphasized in historical accounts, must be understood in context. Gold, precious stones, exotic timber, and luxury goods were not mere symbols of opulence. They were strategic tools for consolidating power, building alliances, and signaling capability. Solomon used wealth as a medium of influence, creating an economy of prestige and obligation. Tribute and gifts from foreign nations reinforced the perception of his supremacy, while domestic prosperity fostered loyalty and social cohesion. Wealth, in his hands, became a mechanism of subtle influence, a tool that enabled him to shape relationships, command respect, and project power without relying solely on force. Trade networks under Solomon further exemplify his strategic foresight. By establishing routes connecting the Levant, Africa, and the Far East, he ensured a steady flow of goods, knowledge, and skilled labor. These networks strengthened Israel's economy and expanded its cultural reach, creating interdependencies that enhanced Solomon's influence beyond immediate borders. In this sense, trade was not merely an economic activity but an instrument of statecraft. Each shipment, alliance, and negotiation contributed to a broader strategy of influence, reinforcing the perception that Solomon's wisdom extended into every aspect of life, from commerce to diplomacy to governance. A striking aspect of Solomon's authority is its foundation in spiritual legitimacy. Unlike secular rulers who rely solely on conquest or coercion, Solomon's power was anchored in his covenantal relationship with God. Divine endorsement provided moral authority and societal cohesion, ensuring that obedience was not only pragmatic but also spiritually motivated. This spiritual dimension allowed him to operate with legitimacy that transcended mere political power. Decisions carried weight not just because of practical consequences but because they were perceived as aligned with divine will. This duality, temporal power coupled with spiritual legitimacy, underpins much of what made Solomon's reign exceptional. The temple illustrates the integration of these dimensions. Beyond its architectural grandeur, the temple functioned as a center of both spiritual and political influence. Rituals, priestly authority, and sacred symbolism reinforced societal order, while the physical structure demonstrated technological mastery and artistic achievement. By aligning spiritual practice with civic life, Solomon created an enduring framework through which his authority permeated every aspect of society. In doing so, he established a model of governance that combined ethical guidance, ritual legitimacy, and practical administration in a seamless whole. Solomon's literary contributions also played a crucial role in perpetuating his influence. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon were not merely expressions of personal reflection. They were instruments of social instruction, moral guidance, and strategic insight. By codifying knowledge, Solomon ensured that his understanding of human behavior, governance, and spiritual principles could be transmitted across generations. This strategic use of written wisdom allowed his influence to outlast his immediate political control, creating a legacy of thought, morality, and leadership that continues to inform and inspire centuries later. A further dimension of his secret power was diplomacy. Through marriages, alliances, and cultural exchange, Solomon established a network of relationships that reinforced Israel's position in the region. Unlike rulers who relied solely on military might, he understood the power of perception, mutual interest, and strategic positioning. By managing alliances thoughtfully, Solomon created a web of influence that extended beyond his immediate authority. In essence, his power was both direct and indirect. He could command through judgment and spiritual authority, but he could also shape outcomes by orchestrating relationships, perceptions, and obligations. Ultimately, Solomon's secret power is multidimensional. It blends intellect, spiritual insight, diplomacy, wealth management, and mystical perception into a coherent system of influence. It is not a power that can be fully understood through any single lens, because it operates across multiple domains simultaneously. Solomon's ability to integrate these dimensions, to align divine principles with practical governance, and to anticipate and shape human behavior, distinguishes him as one of history's most extraordinary rulers. His legacy is not merely a collection of achievements or monuments, but a demonstration of how wisdom, when combined with strategy, spirituality, and insight, becomes a force that endures beyond a single lifetime. Solomon's wisdom extended beyond human affairs into the natural world, according to the traditions that have been passed down over centuries. Numerous accounts suggest that he possessed the ability to communicate with animals, command natural forces, and interpret signs in ways that allowed him to govern with extraordinary efficiency. In one famous tale, Solomon converses with birds, listening to their messages, and understanding the hidden movements of his kingdom. In another, he commands lions and other wild beasts, keeping them in harmony with human settlements, illustrating not only dominion over creatures but also a profound understanding of the balance between nature and civilization. These stories, whether taken literally or allegorically, underscore a theme central to Solomon's authority. Mastery arises from understanding patterns, both seen and unseen. The extension of this mastery into spiritual and mystical realms further amplifies the concept of secret power. Solomon is said to have possessed knowledge of divine names, magical seals, and sacred incantations that allowed him to summon, control, or restrain supernatural entities. One of the most famous of these is the Seal of Solomon, often depicted as a hexagram, which according to tradition enabled him to command spirits, angels, and even demons. Historical and folkloric sources suggest that through these means, Solomon could harness unseen forces to build structures, protect his people, and maintain societal order. This ability to navigate both the natural and supernatural realms marks a clear distinction between ordinary kingship and the unique form of leadership Solomon embodied. Trade, diplomacy, and mystical knowledge combined to create a kingdom that was resilient, adaptive, and influential. Solomon's court became a magnet for scholars, artisans, and leaders from far-flung regions. The stories of ambassadors arriving from Sheba, bringing exotic gifts and inquiring into his wisdom, illustrate not only his renown but also the practical applications of his intelligence. Each visitor carried knowledge, resources, and alliances, all of which Solomon could integrate into the broader strategy of maintaining power. This shows an essential principle. Wisdom without action is incomplete. Solomon's wisdom was operational. It guided construction projects, diplomacy, taxation, trade, and social policy, creating a feedback loop that reinforced his authority and expanded his kingdom's influence. The integration of mysticism with governance had practical applications. Accounts suggest that Solomon's understanding of astrology, natural cycles, and omens allowed him to plan construction projects, military campaigns, and festivals with precision. Aligning human activity with perceived cosmic rhythms was not merely symbolic. It reinforced social cohesion, enhanced religious observance, and projected an image of a ruler whose insight extended beyond ordinary human capacity. The perception of divine favor and cosmic alignment bolstered loyalty among subjects and deterred rivals, demonstrating the subtle interplay between spiritual authority and political power in Solomon's reign. Solomon's power also rested on his ability to recognize and manipulate psychological dynamics. He observed behavior, interpreted motivations, and anticipated reactions with uncanny accuracy. Stories of disputes resolved in ways that revealed hidden truths demonstrate that his judgments were not just legalistic but also psychological. By understanding the inner workings of human desire, fear, and ambition, Solomon could resolve conflicts, manage competition, and reinforce societal norms. This strategic use of insight created a culture in which truth, justice, and loyalty were deeply intertwined with perceptions of the king's wisdom. It was a system of governance that leveraged human behavior as a resource rather than a challenge. One of the most intriguing aspects of Solomon's authority is his relationship with wealth and construction. The temple, the palace, and associated infrastructure were more than monuments. They were instruments of influence, symbols of divine favor, and centers of social cohesion. The ability to mobilize labor, resources, and logistics on an unprecedented scale reflects both administrative skill and a subtle command over perception. Wealth, when combined with strategic architecture and cultural symbolism, becomes a tool of both internal governance and external diplomacy. By constructing structures that inspired awe, Solomon reinforced the legitimacy of his rule and embedded his authority in the very fabric of society. Solomon's influence extended into legal and ethical domains as well. Proverbs, as recorded in Scripture, provide not merely moral guidance but practical frameworks for commerce, interpersonal relationships, and governance. Each proverb reflects observations of human behavior and societal patterns, distilled into a concise form that conveys both ethical principles and operational strategies. This codification of knowledge served multiple purposes. It educated citizens, guided officials, and perpetuated a system of values that supported the king's objectives. Wisdom, in this sense, becomes both a moral compass and a tactical instrument, reinforcing the structures of society while simultaneously projecting the ruler's authority. A deeper examination of Solomon's mystical knowledge reveals that it was not static but adaptive. He is depicted as engaging in ongoing study, reflection, and dialogue with divine and supernatural forces. The dynamic nature of this wisdom suggests a system in which knowledge, action, and observation are continuously integrated. Such an approach allowed Solomon to respond to new challenges, anticipate threats, and exploit opportunities with a level of sophistication rare in any historical ruler. This capacity for adaptation, combined with a foundation in spiritual insight, positions Solomon as a figure whose authority transcends mere historical context, offering lessons about leadership that remain relevant across centuries. The tales of Solomon's interactions with the Queen of Sheba, foreign dignitaries, and his own counselors reveal a deliberate cultivation of reputation. By demonstrating knowledge that appeared otherworldly, interpreting difficult questions, and managing complex social interactions with grace, Solomon created an aura of wisdom that reinforced both fear and respect. Reputation, in this context, was as powerful as armies or wealth. It shaped alliances, deterred rivals, and amplified the impact of his decisions. The combination of visible achievement, strategic communication, and subtle displays of mystical insight creates a comprehensive model of influence that integrates tangible and intangible elements seamlessly. Solomon's understanding of human nature also extended to matters of desire, loyalty, and ambition. Historical and legendary accounts suggest he could discern intentions, recognize hidden motivations, and predict responses with remarkable accuracy. By doing so, he minimized conflict, maximized cooperation, and reinforced the perception that his wisdom was infallible. This psychological insight was a crucial component of his secret power, allowing him to manage both domestic and foreign relations with a subtlety and efficiency that contributed to the longevity and stability of his kingdom. Ultimately, the secret of Solomon's power is not reducible to any single element. It is the synergy of wisdom, spiritual insight, mystical knowledge, psychological acuity, wealth management, and strategic diplomacy. Each dimension reinforces the others, creating a network of influence that extends beyond immediate perception. Solomon's legacy, therefore, is not merely a record of conquests or construction projects but a demonstration of how multidimensional wisdom, integrated with ethical, spiritual, and practical strategies, creates authority that endures across time. It is this holistic integration that explains why his reign continues to captivate historians, scholars, and spiritual seekers alike. Solomon's connection with the divine is a central thread in understanding his secret power. Unlike ordinary rulers whose authority rests primarily on force, lineage, or political alliances, Solomon's strength emanated from his ability to align his will with divine principles. This alignment was not passive, it was active, deliberate, and disciplined. The biblical account emphasizes his humility at the start of his reign, seeking wisdom above wealth or victory, which positioned him to receive insights that would elevate him far above contemporaries. The lesson embedded in this narrative is that true power is often a reflection of moral and spiritual attunement, a principle that resonates through every story of his reign. One of the most potent symbols of Solomon's mystical authority is the famous Seal of Solomon. Historical records, folklore, and esoteric traditions describe it as more than an emblem. It was a tool of control over both supernatural and earthly realms. The seal, often portrayed as a hexagram or intertwined triangles, represents the convergence of divine order and human authority. Through it, Solomon was said to summon and command spirits, angels, and even demons, compelling them to execute tasks ranging from construction projects to protective surveillance over his kingdom. While the historicity of such claims remains debated, the underlying concept is clear. Solomon's leadership relied on a synthesis of natural and supernatural strategy, blending intellect, ritual, and spiritual insight into practical governance. Mystical texts and historical traditions often recount Solomon's ability to influence the elements and natural forces. In some accounts, he could summon winds, control water, and direct animals to perform tasks in harmony with his objectives. This mastery of the environment reflects not merely magical thinking but an understanding of patterns and systems. By observing cause and effect in nature, Solomon could anticipate outcomes, optimize resource allocation, and maintain ecological balance within his realm. In practical terms, this meant that his decisions were informed by a systemic awareness that connected human activity to the broader rhythms of the world, a holistic approach rarely matched in any historical empire. Solomon's empire was also remarkable for its economic sophistication. Trade networks extended from the Levant to Africa, Arabia, and beyond, bringing wealth, resources, and influence. The story of the Queen of Sheba's visit illustrates not only Solomon's renown but also the practical application of his wisdom. He could negotiate complex deals, evaluate gifts and resources, and establish alliances that reinforced both security and prosperity. His strategic approach to commerce demonstrates that mystical insight was always paired with pragmatic skill. Wisdom, in Solomon's case, was never abstract. It was operational, guiding both the allocation of material resources and the management of human relationships to sustain a powerful, stable kingdom. Solomon's mastery over language, rhetoric, and communication further amplified his influence. Proverbs, songs, and parables served not only as moral instruction but as instruments of persuasion, education, and diplomacy. Each carefully crafted saying conveyed complex social, ethical, or political lessons in a form that was easily remembered and transmitted. This ability to encode wisdom in accessible language ensured that his influence extended beyond his lifetime, reaching generations who would continue to internalize and enact his principles. In essence, communication itself became a channel for power, turning knowledge into social leverage. The hidden dimension of Solomon's power is also evident in his understanding of psychology and human behavior. Legends recount instances in which he discerned truth from falsehood, motive from pretense, and loyalty from deceit. His judgment of the two mothers claiming the same child is a classic example. It demonstrates his ability to read human emotions, predict reactions, and design outcomes that reveal truth while maintaining social order. By observing subtleties in behavior, tone, and action, Solomon could make decisions that were both fair and strategically sound. His mastery of perception became a tool of governance as potent as armies or fortresses. Mystical knowledge and practical governance intersected in Solomon's approach to construction and infrastructure. The Temple of Solomon, often described as a marvel of architectural and spiritual significance, reflects a fusion of meticulous planning, artistic vision, and sacred purpose. The massive undertaking required coordination of labor, resources, and logistics on an unprecedented scale. Yet beyond the tangible accomplishment, the temple represented an alignment of human effort with divine intention. Each stone, pillar, and ornament symbolized a deeper understanding of order, harmony, and spiritual resonance, reinforcing the perception that Solomon's rule was sanctioned and guided by higher wisdom. Solomon's ability to maintain political stability relied heavily on intelligence networks and diplomatic foresight. Historical and legendary accounts suggest he employed emissaries, spies, and advisors to monitor distant territories, preempt threats, and secure alliances. This system reflects an early form of statecraft in which information and insight were as critical as military force. By integrating observation, analysis, and action, Solomon created a responsive and resilient governance structure. Intelligence gathering, in combination with mystical insight, allowed him to anticipate challenges and respond with strategic precision, ensuring the continuity of his reign and the security of his kingdom. Another facet of Solomon's secret power was his capacity to integrate diverse cultures and knowledge systems into a coherent societal structure. The kingdom encompassed various peoples, languages, and traditions, yet under Solomon's guidance, these differences became strengths rather than sources of conflict. By promoting cultural exchange, fostering education, and valuing expertise from multiple sources, Solomon harnessed the diversity of his empire as a tool of innovation and stability. This ability to unify complexity mirrors the broader theme of his power, a combination of discernment, wisdom, and strategic execution that allowed him to turn potential challenges into opportunities. The combination of spiritual insight, practical wisdom, and political acumen reached its most visible expression in Solomon's management of both wealth and justice. Resources were allocated to maintain infrastructure, support the arts, and finance military and administrative operations. Justice was administered not merely through codified laws but through discernment, ethical reasoning, and understanding of human nature. This integration of material management with moral governance created a system in which legitimacy, prosperity, and social cohesion were mutually reinforcing. Solomon's power, therefore, was multidimensional. It encompassed divine connection, human insight, natural mastery, and societal organization. Beyond the tangible achievements of Solomon's reign lies the realm of esoteric knowledge that elevated him above ordinary rulers. Ancient texts, rabbinical commentary, and later mystical traditions suggest that Solomon possessed access to hidden wisdom encoded in the natural world, celestial patterns, and the structure of reality itself. This knowledge was not a mere collection of facts, it was an integrated system that connected ethics, physics, language, and metaphysics. Solomon's ability to perceive these connections allowed him to anticipate outcomes, influence events, and harness forces that remained invisible to ordinary human perception. In essence, his power operated at both the material and metaphysical levels, making him a bridge between the earthly and the divine. One of the most remarkable accounts of Solomon's hidden power involves his relationship with angels and spiritual entities. According to tradition, the angelic realm provided guidance, insight, and protection. Solomon was uniquely able to communicate with these beings, often invoking their assistance in matters ranging from the construction of the temple to the resolution of complex diplomatic conflicts. These interactions were structured through rituals, prayers, and symbolic objects, demonstrating a disciplined approach to spiritual practice. Unlike the chaotic or reckless depictions of magic in later folklore, Solomon's engagement with the supernatural was intentional, ethical, and oriented toward justice and divine purpose. The control of spirits, both benign and malevolent, is central to many stories about Solomon. One famous narrative involves the command of demons to aid in construction projects, particularly the building of the Temple of Jerusalem. Texts describe how these spirits performed tasks with precision and strength beyond human capability. This suggests a model of leadership in which authority is not purely coercive but relational, leveraging the abilities of all entities, human or spiritual, toward a coordinated objective. Solomon's ability to command these forces illustrates a broader principle. True authority often requires knowledge, strategy, and ethical alignment, not just brute power. Solomon's mystical insight extended into language and symbolism. He understood that words carry inherent power, capable of shaping perception, influencing behavior, and even affecting the natural world. This principle is echoed in the creation of proverbs, songs, and sacred texts, which were not only didactic but functional instruments of societal organization and spiritual influence. The careful choice of words, the framing of moral dilemmas, and the encoding of wisdom into memorable narratives allowed Solomon's insights to persist long after his reign. Language became a conduit for power, transmitting knowledge across generations and maintaining social cohesion within a diverse empire. Another aspect of Solomon's secret power lies in his understanding of nature and the environment. Ancient accounts suggest he possessed extraordinary knowledge of flora and fauna, climate patterns, and geological formations. This knowledge allowed him to make decisions about agriculture, trade, and urban planning with precision. He could anticipate seasonal changes, optimize resource allocation, and even employ animals and natural phenomena to achieve strategic objectives. In modern terms, Solomon's approach resembles a combination of ecological science, systems analysis, and strategic management, demonstrating that his wisdom encompassed both spiritual and practical intelligence. Solomon's alliances and diplomatic strategies further illustrate his mastery of power. He maintained connections with neighboring kingdoms through marriage, trade, and negotiation. Each alliance was carefully structured to maximize security, economic advantage, and cultural influence. The marriage alliances, particularly with foreign princesses, were not merely political. They facilitated cultural exchange, introduced new knowledge systems, and strengthened Solomon's position in a complex international landscape. These strategies highlight the integration of social intelligence with ethical governance, a hallmark of Solomon's multifaceted approach to authority. The economic dimension of Solomon's power cannot be understated. Trade networks extended from the Levant to Arabia, Africa, and beyond, ensuring a steady flow of resources, luxury goods, and intelligence. Solomon's control over these networks demonstrates his strategic awareness and organizational skill. By combining economic leverage with ethical leadership, mystical insight, and diplomatic acumen, Solomon created a sustainable system of governance that reinforced his authority while benefiting his people. His economic strategies were also informed by a deep understanding of human motivation and market dynamics, anticipating the behavior of allies, adversaries, and traders alike. Solomon's engagement with justice and ethical governance reinforced his spiritual authority. Legendary stories highlight his ability to resolve disputes with extraordinary fairness and discernment. These judgments were not based solely on law but on a profound understanding of human nature, moral principles, and the societal impact of decisions. In the famous case of the two mothers claiming a child, Solomon's solution revealed truth without conflict, demonstrating that wisdom, when combined with insight into behavior and morality, can produce outcomes that are both just and strategically sound. This aspect of his power highlights the interplay between intellect, ethics, and authority. One cannot ignore the esoteric traditions linking Solomon to the understanding of cosmic and natural laws. Medieval and later mystical writings suggest he had insight into the movements of celestial bodies, the cycles of time, and the underlying structure of creation. Whether interpreted metaphorically or literally, these accounts indicate that Solomon's wisdom was perceived as comprehensive, integrating human experience with universal order. Such insight would have allowed him to make decisions with an awareness of long-term consequences, aligning immediate actions with a broader cosmic or divine plan. The enduring fascination with Solomon's secret power is also reflected in literature, philosophy, and mysticism throughout the centuries. His wisdom became a model for rulers, scholars, and mystics seeking to understand the relationship between human agency and divine guidance. The blending of practical governance, spiritual insight, and ethical responsibility presents a timeless template for leadership. Modern readers can still extract lessons from Solomon's approach. Humility before the unknown, disciplined study, ethical discernment, and strategic execution are as relevant today as they were in the ancient world. The legacy of Solomon's secret power extends far beyond the boundaries of his kingdom. Scholars and mystics alike have long debated the origins of the knowledge he wielded, and many point to a combination of divine inspiration and disciplined study. Ancient sources suggest that Solomon had access to archives, records, and oral traditions that predated his reign, including wisdom from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and other ancient civilizations. These bodies of knowledge were likely synthesized with divine revelation, allowing Solomon to see patterns, predict outcomes, and wield influence with precision. In this sense, his wisdom was both inherited and uniquely enhanced, a fusion of human study and celestial insight. The mystical tools attributed to Solomon, most famously the Seal of Solomon, illustrate the symbolic and practical dimensions of his power. The seal, often depicted as a hexagram or interlocking triangles, was believed to grant control over spiritual entities and access to hidden knowledge. Beyond its legendary use in commanding spirits, the seal also functioned as a symbol of authority, legitimacy, and divine favor. It represented the alignment of heaven and earth, the integration of moral authority with strategic insight, and the capacity to navigate the hidden forces that influence human and natural events. Possession of such a tool underscored the idea that Solomon's rule was not merely political but cosmically sanctioned. Solomon's writings, including the Book of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs, provide a window into the breadth of his understanding. Proverbs, with its concise and pointed wisdom, conveys principles of leadership, ethics, and human behavior, emphasizing foresight, prudence, and the consequences of action. Ecclesiastes reflects on the limits of human knowledge, the transience of power, and the search for meaning, revealing a philosophical depth often absent in contemporary rulers. Song of Songs, while poetic and allegorical, symbolizes harmony, union, and the power of love as a guiding force. Together, these works depict a mind attuned to both practical governance and the inner workings of the human soul. The esoteric tradition surrounding Solomon also credits him with advanced knowledge of geometry, architecture, and engineering. The construction of the Temple of Jerusalem, the royal palace, and infrastructure projects required not only labor management but precise technical understanding. Descriptions of the temple highlight intricate stonework, elaborate chambers, and symbolic decorations, reflecting knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and proportion. Ancient texts suggest that Solomon may have had access to knowledge akin to early engineering principles, celestial alignments, and harmonic ratios, integrating spiritual symbolism with structural function. The temple itself became a nexus where divine presence and human skill intersected, embodying the highest expression of his wisdom. Solomon's approach to leadership was holistic, encompassing governance, spirituality, ethics, and the natural world. His ability to balance competing interests, nobles, foreign powers, spiritual leaders, and the general population demonstrates advanced understanding of social dynamics. Stories recount how he managed court intrigue, diplomatic tensions, and internal dissent with strategies that were both subtle and decisive. His decisions often integrated ethical reasoning with strategic calculation, revealing that true power lies not in force alone but in perception, persuasion, and timing. By harmonizing morality and authority, Solomon exemplified leadership that transcends mere politics, influencing generations through example. A particularly fascinating aspect of Solomon's secret power is his association with the knowledge of the natural world, sometimes referred to in mystical sources as the Book of Creation. This knowledge encompassed understanding of animals, plants, minerals, and the hidden connections between them. He reportedly classified species, observed behaviors, and applied this understanding to practical matters such as agriculture, medicine, and governance. The story of the Queen of Sheba, who tested Solomon's wisdom, emphasizes his ability to integrate observational science with moral and political insight, impressing not only with knowledge but with the capacity to apply it judiciously. The spiritual dimension of Solomon's power also included ritual and symbolism, central to both his governance and mystical legacy. Rituals were not empty ceremonies but practical frameworks that organized human and spiritual energies. Through prayer, offerings, and symbolic acts, Solomon reinforced the alignment between divine will and earthly affairs. These practices served multiple purposes. They were acts of devotion, instruments of governance, and methods to maintain the balance between visible authority and invisible forces. Solomon's success, therefore, was not simply due to innate talent but to a disciplined integration of spiritual practice, ethical decision-making, and strategic execution. Solomon's relationships with other nations highlight a sophisticated understanding of cultural intelligence. His court was a center for scholars, artisans, and foreign envoys, fostering exchange of ideas, technology, and philosophy. By incorporating knowledge from other civilizations into his own rule, Solomon created a dynamic, adaptive system that could respond to internal challenges and external threats. This approach demonstrates that intelligence is relational as much as it is individual. Wisdom flourishes in environments where ideas can be exchanged, tested, and refined. Solomon's ability to synthesize foreign knowledge with native insight exemplifies a model of leadership that is both expansive and deeply strategic. The hidden dimensions of Solomon's power extended to psychological insight. Tales of his judgments and diplomacy suggest a profound understanding of human behavior, motivation, and the consequences of action. He could perceive deception, anticipate ambitions, and deploy strategies that minimized conflict while maximizing compliance and cooperation. In modern terms, this represents a mastery of social engineering, negotiation, and emotional intelligence, long before these concepts were formally articulated. Solomon's psychological acuity ensured that his influence persisted even when direct power waned, leaving a legacy that endured through written wisdom, symbolic authority, and cultural memory. Finally, the enduring fascination with Solomon's secret power lies in the interplay between the visible and invisible. His achievements, temples, palaces, alliances, and treaties were tangible, but his influence extended into realms unseen, shaping events through insight, strategy, and spiritual authority. This duality is perhaps why his story continues to captivate. It models leadership that integrates knowledge, ethics, and strategic foresight, showing that true power is multidimensional, blending tangible accomplishments with mastery of subtle forces. The final chapter of Solomon's secret power is not measured in monuments or treaties but in enduring influence. His wisdom, codified in proverbs, songs, and rituals, created a framework that generations would reference, interpret, and aspire to follow. This influence is both practical and symbolic. Practical in the lessons of governance, justice, and diplomacy. Symbolic in the way his life and decisions came to embody the integration of moral authority, spiritual insight, and strategic acumen. Leaders, scholars, and mystics through the centuries have studied Solomon not merely to emulate his actions but to understand the underlying principles that made him effective. Solomon's spiritual authority is perhaps his most remarkable legacy. Unlike kings who relied solely on armies or wealth, Solomon understood the subtle dynamics of influence, both human and divine. His ability to inspire loyalty, negotiate peace, and maintain internal stability rested on more than charisma. It rested on deep insight into ethics, human psychology, and the natural laws that govern social interaction. The stories of his judgments, such as the famous case of the two women claiming the same child, illustrate his capacity to reveal truth and resolve conflict in ways that reinforced legitimacy, minimized strife, and affirmed moral order. This is the heart of his secret power, an enduring, adaptive wisdom that operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Beyond human affairs, Solomon's connection to the spiritual and mystical realms suggests a model of knowledge that transcends conventional understanding. His reported communication with angels, access to divine wisdom, and command over spiritual entities point to a reality in which leadership requires alignment with forces beyond the visible world. While the literal truth of these accounts may be debated, the underlying lesson is clear. The greatest power often requires understanding and cooperation with forces that operate outside ordinary perception. Leaders today can interpret this symbolically as the importance of ethical alignment, foresight, and attunement to patterns that lie beyond immediate observation. The long-term impact of Solomon's rule can be seen in the cultural, religious, and political structures that survived his death. His temple became a spiritual anchor for Israel, his writings a source of moral and intellectual guidance, and his example a benchmark for leadership. Even in exile and diaspora, the principles associated with Solomon, justice, wisdom, discernment, continued to shape communities and inspire generations. This enduring legacy illustrates a critical truth. Influence grounded in wisdom and ethical insight outlasts temporal power and material wealth. In conclusion, the untold story of Solomon's secret power is a lesson in multidimensional leadership. It shows the value of combining spiritual insight with practical skill, the necessity of ethical grounding in the exercise of authority, and the importance of foresight in navigating complex social, political, and spiritual landscapes. Solomon's life teaches that true power is not merely the capacity to command or conquer, but the ability to integrate knowledge, morality, and strategic understanding to create a lasting impact. His story challenges us to reconsider the nature of influence and the means by which it is exercised. It demonstrates that wisdom, when applied with discernment, can shape not only immediate outcomes but also the trajectory of entire nations. Solomon's secret power, hidden yet profoundly effective, serves as a timeless example that mastery of both visible and invisible forces, when aligned with ethical and spiritual principles, creates a legacy that endures far beyond a single lifetime, inspiring generations to seek the balance between knowledge, morality, and action.